I've been running a used bookstore now for a year and a half. Clearly not all my life. But it's something I've always wanted to do since I was a little kid. My great aunt ran a bookstore, and she was the only relative I had within 20 miles, so we'd go over there sometimes. We'd always get free books from her. And I've always loved books and been fascinated by books. So when I opened Eat My Words here in Northeast, it really was fulfillment of a dream. And I'd been dreaming about it for years, but working hard towards that goal for a couple of years before that, gathering books, trying to organize myself, making sure I could do it financially because I knew I wasn't going to make any money doing it. And so that's pretty much how I got here. I mean, for most of the time before that, for 30 years before that, I'd been a corporate attorney, and before that, done a number of other things, typesetter, dishwasher, stagehand, whatever, until I started law school when I was 30. But starting from the time, I don't know, as I said when I was a kid, it's always been the idea to run a bookstore, and it's been a delight. I mean, it's stressful because I've never run my own business and I don't know what I'm doing, but it is basically what I was hoping for.
What was it that made running a bookstore seem like heaven?
One thing is just being around books. Just a friend of mine says I like to fondle books, and there's something true about that. As perverted as it may sound, but just handling the books, seeing what's out there, and then the other piece of it is the sharing, the getting books to other people, helping people find books that they want or that they didn't know they wanted because they didn't even know the book existed, but is really something they were looking for. And just the sharing of the ideas in them, in getting physical books into people's hands, and it's the redistribution of the books. It's like these are used books. Somebody else has read them and enjoyed them. Now they're going to be passed on to somebody else. And I've always liked getting books that have a couple of ex-owners' names in them, because somebody else, so you have this connection with somebody you never knew or never even knew existed before, and so you've got this shared knowledge or this shared enjoyment, and so I want to help further that. Just keep the books moving from person to person. When I started seriously working on it, I thought I knew a lot. I thought I knew a lot about books and a lot about the books that were out there, and it's incredible the number of books and the number of kinds of books that exist that in my own little world, which was a lot of books, it was just a small fraction of them. There are just so many more that are also interesting and are beyond the scope of anything I knew about. But now that I'm being the mighty book hunter and going out and finding more books, it's just amazing what you can find. Books you just never knew existed. Some by famous authors, like William Burroughs has written a book about cats, for instance, or Dr. Seuss's adult cartoons. Stuff. Those are two that I've had recently. They're just like, I didn't know this was out there. This is interesting. This is kind of cool. Ray Bradbury's children's book. He wrote one, as far as I know. It's all I've ever seen. So to stumble across these by famous writers, plus equally interesting books by people you've never heard of. It's just wonderful. And then to find them and to find somebody else who might like them. It's fun. It's fun. It's, I know it's useful in the world. It's always nice to be useful.
So, were you a great reader during those all
Yes.
those years before you became a bookstore owner?
Yeah, I've always read. I'm always reading at least one book, sometimes two or three. I've been reading since before I went to school. My mother says she doesn't know how or when I learned to read. She didn't teach me, but I was reading by the time I was 4. And it just never stopped. It isn't my entire life. I do other things too, but I always have at least a book going. I read at least half an hour every day, sometimes, depending on schedule and so on, a couple hours a day. And I was an English major with a history minor, so that's a lot of reading. I got a college degree for reading books. That was perfect for me. But yeah, I've always read, and all sorts of things. Some trash. I like science fiction and mysteries, but I also read. I still like classics. I still like Dickens and Austen and stuff like that. Or on the history side, or I especially lately gotten into history of science, and I find that interesting, just fascinating about how science and philosophy were so close at one time, say 1600, and it kind of split apart, but there's always that tension between logic and faith and reason and belief kind of things, where you, and I just find it fascinating to read about that, whether it's about, say, Descartes or in some sci-fi book where sometimes the same topics can come up.
Is there anything that you can think of that distinguished your style or strategy as a reader from other folks you knew who liked to read? Or were you a particular kind of reader?
Boy, I think strategy is too strong a word.
Style,
yeah,
maybe.
Yeah. 'Cause there certainly wasn't a plan. Although I tend to alternate a heavier book with a lighter book. But no, I don't. I have sometimes looked at other people's lists of books I should read. Yeah, sometimes yes, sometimes no. No, it's just whatever grabs my fancy at the time.
And your way of reading? Anything peculiar there?
I read in the bathtub, which has ruined a couple of good books, but that's a price. It's a time when I can probably be most alone in the world. Other than that, yeah, it just pretty much whenever I can. I found myself driving to work and bringing a book with me that I know I have like 20 pages to go on, but that I have to get to work. So I get to work and then I sit in the parking lot and finish the book before I go in. So technically I've gone to work on time, but I guess the other thing in terms of style, I know, and I hear this from lots of other readers too, is the stack of books. Always have a stack of books by the bedside, or a friend of mine has them on her bed, or maybe it's on the table next to the couch or something like that, where there's always a stack of 7, 8, 20, 40 books, whatever, that are going to be the next ones to be read. And sometimes a book will stay on there for a year or two, but eventually it was selected to be read, and it'll be gotten to. And new books get added. You finish one and you add 3 more, and that's not uncommon from what I hear from other readers. But I think it's always fascinating to look at my own stack and go, oh, that's interesting. I've been putting a whole bunch of this kind of book on. Say right now it's modern novelists that I think I ought to read, but I haven't gotten to yet. I haven't read any Pamuk yet, but I have 2 of them on the stack, and there's only like 8 books on the stack now, and I know I'm going to get to them. But stuff like that you can check your own habits. I've been putting these books on here, but I'm not getting to them. What does that say?
Now, once you get to something, are you scrupulous about reading it to the last page?
No. Sometimes I just give up on them. It's not. I'm pretty good about it, but sometimes it'll bore me or be so badly written that I just can't. That all I do is notice that it's badly written, and so you don't get into any other way. You can't follow the plot, or you can't. If it's nonfiction, you can't follow the arguments because you just wonder how somebody got published being that bad a writer. And sometimes it's a failure of the willing suspension of disbelief. It just I can't suspend it any longer. This book isn't going to make it, and I can't believe this.
Have any of the technologies of the last 100 years or so made inroads in your reading? I mean, presumably the lamp.
The lamp.
But I'm just wondering, things like Kindles and audiobooks and
not for me.
Library Thing and all of these cataloging tools.
The only thing where I say there have been inroads is I can look stuff up on the internet. I can look up an author or something that has been said in the book. I can go and find out more about it without having to get up. But I haven't used a Kindle or a Nook, and I can understand. Lots of people do. They find it handy. They say, well, it's good for travel. Well, I just pack 5 books instead. But using the internet to follow up on things or to find out, well, has this guy written another book? Or particularly history books. The most recent one was somebody writing about the almost state of Franklin. At one point, Western North Carolina was going to secede and form its own state because it didn't like being taxed by Eastern North Carolina. This is like right after the Revolution. They were going to form their own state and never quite got off the ground. And so I looked it up and found out there's probably been 20, 25 other movements for independent statehood. Upper Peninsula of Michigan is an obvious one. You can see why they made money. But there've been, so I got into looking up that stuff. I didn't have a book on hand about it, but there was stuff on the internet that gave me more information about that.
Yeah, that can be so helpful, especially if somebody doesn't explain the references. Now, is reading for you an alternative to things like movies and documentaries and that sort of stuff, or or is it just another medium?
I don't go to movies a whole lot. I used to go more. I just haven't much, I don't have much time. The reading you can do on your own schedule, which is nice. Going out to the movies is one thing. I don't have a TV, so it does definitely taken the place of that. And I have had one in the past. I've always liked, watching hockey and baseball, and occasionally a movie on TV, but I don't even have a TV at the moment. But I go out to plays, I go out to live music. I find them just great as another alternate form of entertainment and knowledge.
And how did it work together to be a corporate lawyer and a reader?
Well, it's a different, as a lawyer, you read a lot. You read an entirely different kind of material in an entirely different way. But I have made the connection sometimes. Well, the other thing is sometimes at the end of the day, my eyes are pretty tired. Okay, there's that. But there are some connections. Words are words, and one of my main jobs as a lawyer is drafting contracts, and it's a lot. In a weird way, it's kind of like writing poetry, and you're trying to get something that's precise in some places and ambiguous in other places, and you're trying to find the exact right word to fit that need, and nobody's going to read it till after you're dead anyway. So there is some sort of the playing with words that's still similar. The making the arguments, and I don't do trial work. I don't, but I do work with words.
So there's an old joke about farmers, and the farmer gets asked, what do you do if you win the lottery? And the answer is, well, I think I'll just kind of keep farming till I use it up.
Yeah.
Is that the real situation with little bookstores? That you can kind of use up your retirement selling books?
If I've done this right, I'm kind of planning. I could outlive it. I could outlive the money and then have to get rid of the bookstore. But I'm not making money, and I'd love to break even. I'd be happy with that. But yeah, I'm not going to leave much for my kids if I live long enough. Well, no, I will leave them. They've already divvied it up over dinner one night. They decided who got my books and who got my record albums. So they're both gonna inherit fairly well. But yeah, the money, I'm not in it for that, and I hope I have enough set aside that I can do this for another 20 years or so, and that'd be just great.
Yeah. I guess, I've haunted bookstores all my life. I'm good friends with people who run them. First sponsor of my television show was Kristen Ida Tollefson from the Book House.
Sure.
And yet, it's hard to avoid when I actually need something, either pulling it down on the Kindle or buying it for a penny from Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll bet a lot of people kind of feel that way. And it kind of raises the question of how, there are people who buy from bookstores, because they wouldn't be caught dead doing anything else out of principle. But for morally more suspect types like myself, how do you see a bookstore establishing a niche, so to speak?
the books that I carry or try to carry are the ones that you can't find on Kindle. If you find them on Amazon, they aren't the ones for a penny. And the same ones, the same kinds of books, and it isn't like they're totally out there. They aren't so totally bizarre that you wouldn't ever think the book existed. But well, we sell on Amazon. We sell on Amazon and the other, ABE and Libris and Biblio, the other three major book-selling sites. And we sell the same kind of books that we sell in the store. And we don't sell the ones that are on there for a penny, because you can get those at garage sales for a quarter and you don't have to pay for the shipping. But it's the more unusual books. It's if you're looking for Stephen King, you can find that anywhere. If you're looking for James Patterson, whatever, the best sellers, those you can get anywhere. But there are lots of other books out there that you may not know about. If you're looking for a specific book, maybe you can find it for a penny on Amazon, but maybe you can find it for $20 on Amazon, and I'll sell it to you for $15 instead. So that's the niche for me anyway. You look at some of the other booksellers in town. Some of the you get the Uncle Edgar and Uncle Hugo specializing in mysteries and sci-fi. You get Ancestry that only sells books by authors of color. They're trying to find a niche there. They're even newer than my store. And I hope they do well. But it's an interesting approach. Or some of the others that there's a couple that are fairly left-wing and specialize in that kind of thing. More movement books than anything else. So they're trying to find stuff like that. But it comes down to selection, and what are you gonna find to put in your store, or whether it's new or used, what's your selection gonna be that's gonna interest people, that's gonna be something they can't find someplace else, and it's the challenge and it's the fun too.
Well, I think of, I've done a little bit of tagging along with Kristen book hunting, and somebody who was a decent reader dies and leaves, a lot of volumes. And well, one thing is you can have your store utterly taken over by their library, which means, your Kierkegaard shop.
Yeah.
Or, but you have the shot at it.
It's so hard to pass it up. That's a bit of an addiction sometimes. My clerks are complaining that I got to lay off a bit and not bring in so many, and I know they're right. But guy came in yesterday with 9 boxes of books. I bought 5 of the boxes. 2 boxes, I'm really skeptical about why I did it, because it's all Kennedy assassination conspiracy books. But I didn't pay much for them, so I don't feel bad about it. But the rest, it's Steinbeck and Vonnegut and some cheap old sci-fi stuff and Agatha Christie and stuff I can use. And then I rejected stuff that wasn't in good shape, or accounting handbooks and things like that. But yeah, you can have your stuff taken over. You're right about going to estate sales. You feel like a little bit like a vulture. Going to. I've been to 3 great estate sales of professors who recently died. 2 of them English professors. One was a psychology professor, but her stuff the psychology stuff was okay, but she had this wonderful collection of children's books too. Couldn't pass them. Picture books in wonderful shape. But the English professors too, they had different specialties. One was a St. Thomas professor, a lot of fairly religious books, whether fiction or nonfiction. And the other one was a McAllister professor who had, besides his English lit stuff, and particularly was in Shakespeare, was also in love with Japan. So he had books about Japanese gardens and Japanese tattoo styles, and so I scooped up as many of them as I could. So yeah, you do. I know what I'm going to do with all these Kennedy assassination books. They may stay in the basement and just go up online, but there may be a market for it. I have far too many Lincoln biographies. I never knew there were so many biographies of Lincoln, and most of them are the hagiography, the life, just how wonderful he was, and written like 1910 or so. My God, there's a lot of them out there. I have copies of many of them, and some are on consignment and some were free, so I took them. But I don't have room for it. You know, I could fill 2 shelves. I don't have the shelf space for them. So I'll put them up online and find space for them in the basement of storage.
Well, how do you develop the kind of relationship with customers that makes for both a decent interchange and also for sales? I think about my own response to your store because I stop next door to it once a week to do something. I look over it. My first thought was, it's a small bookstore, which means the odds are it won't have anything particular I'm looking for. It won't have. Now, that of course would be wrong sometimes.
Right.
And the other thought I have is, which I'm sure I'm not alone, is I probably have 40,000 books in my upstairs.
Yeah.
I don't know that I can bring in any more without wrecking the house supports. So, question kind of, how do you work? I'm a pretty possible customer for you. I'm going to stop because you told me about those children's books. And if there was some source that told me that you had had a new shipment of children's books, I'd probably be over there because I know what kinds of treasures you can find in a collection like that. So how do you do that? How do you handle this customer relations?
There are people who come in looking for a specific book, and it's usually either something fairly common. Do you have a copy of Catcher in the Rye? Yeah, we got a few of those. Always have a few on hand. Or looking for something so obscure that I've never heard of it. I look it up online. Maybe it's there, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, well I've been looking for that in every bookstore for the last 5 years. I haven't found it." Then I would feel bad that I don't have it. And occasionally it's something like, "We had a copy, we sold it a week ago. I'm sorry, there's nothing you can do." So there's those looking for specific books. It's a lot, and sometimes you can. And I'm not a salesman. Sometimes I can say, "Well, you might want to look back in this section, there's some stuff like it, or we have something else by that author." The ones where I can steer them better are when they say, "Well, I'm looking for something about this topic." We had a lady come in week before last. She wanted to know for any books about the Mississippi River. And $130 later, which is a big sale for us, she walked out with, a big bag of books, including Mark Twain's Mississippi writings, some early photographs of the Mississippi, a book about flooding on the Mississippi, just she cleaned us out. We now do not have any books on the Mississippi anymore. But it was, we steered, okay, over here in the history section, in the nature section, in the memoirs section, we have books on the Mississippi. And that was fun, and I was only part of it. My clerk was just running all over the store saying, oh, what about this, what about this? And so that kind of introducing somebody to books they didn't even know were out there is fun. And then there are others who will come in and have one book that they select. They shop around for a bit, 20 minutes or so, find one book and bring it up, and we start talking books in general. And I'll say, oh, well, have you read this? Or, hey, you're interested in this? Well, here, have you looked at this? And there's a line there about how pushy you can be about it. And I as I said, I'm not a salesman. But I do want them to know that this book's out there. To be able to say, this is something you might be interested in. There's one book we put up online. It's called Barnaby by Crockett Johnson, the guy who did the Harold and the Purple Crayon books. And I could, usually, so you describe the book, and at the end I say, you ought to buy this book. Even if you don't buy it from me, buy this book. Because I loved it so much, I think everybody ought to, get their hands on it at some point. And I can get that enthusiastic, and maybe the customers see that, that I think this is a cool book. I think this is something that they might be interested in. And that's how you establish a relationship, by listening to what they're interested in, and having some knowledge in your head about, oh, well, here we have something that might fit that. Might be something you'd like. And I'm genuinely enthusiastic about it, and that probably helps. I'm not just, they can tell I'm not just pushing it. And I hope that comes across. I sometimes feel bad about being a salesman,
Right.
about the mercantile instinct taking over. But it's more, you think this is cool. You would like this book. You're not going to buy it because it's $40, and I understand you don't have the money and whatever. But here's a cool book I want to show you. And as to your problem with having too many books already, we have people who bring me books either to donate or they'll sell them to me. And they'll say, oh, I need to clear stuff off my shelf. I just have too many books. And then, rather than taking cash, they take store credit so they can come back and buy more books. So it's a disease. And I've got it too, so I understand. I have my own rules for my own collection. I can't add a book to my shelves anymore unless I take one off and take it to the store. So you have to establish some rules for yourself. But yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of passing over into something a little bit like teaching, and also a little bit like therapy.
And a little bit like drug pushing, but yeah.
But I mean, keeping things in circulation. I was amazed. My eyes are a little wonky, so I do a lot with audiobooks. Mm-hmm. My big discovery at about age 40 was I'd much rather listen to a book than read it, and now that's kind of the primary way I get things. Sometimes I buy the book afterwards because you can't page through an audiobook. Mm-hmm. But just looking at the audiobook shelves in the library, one thing that strikes me is that the things that were generally there 10 years ago. People were, you could find maybe one by that author because the others were out. Have disappeared, been replaced by a bunch of others, and in my experience, it's not because the others are better. I mean, Tony Hillerman, Barbara Pym, Dorothy Donette were names to conjure with.
Yeah, and you can't find them anymore?
Well, I mean, you can certainly find them. You can order them.
Yeah,
It's just, they're out of circulation, they're out of, it's not like you just bump into them.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're not going to be caught as classics.
No.
Or at least it's not clear they will. But they're a particular sort of pleasure that is kind of there's nothing like them.
Yeah.
Hillerman can talk for, can go 50 pages describing a trip of 500 miles across the Indian reservation in which the detective sees 3 cars and knows exactly who everybody is,
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of a masterpiece.
Yeah. Yeah. And I read everything I can get my hands on by a British mystery writer named Peter Lovesey. And they're great, but you aren't going to find them there. And they're entertainment. That's all they are. Maybe you'll learn a little something here and there just because you know some stuff. But I don't know if you can find those on tape. I doubt it. He's fairly well known, but not that famous. He's not Agatha Christie or Dorothy Sayers. Yeah.
And just
it's hard. And too bad about your eyes. I think audiobooks are great I use them for trips. So I have something in the car. I know one guy is a plumber, and he gets to read at work. So he has the tape going, and while he's working, he's got an audio tape going. So that's not a bad way to go.
No. There's some astonishingly well-read people in this world now.
Mm-hmm.
Because of audiobooks and because their jobs permit it.
Yeah.
I'm in awe of what some of my, like a guy who drives a bus, I know, very astonishingly well read and smartly read about all kinds of stuff. It's encouraging that there are great readers. But what I love about your approach is this sense of holding on to all of these literary backwaters. There's a book I read into in the Gustavus Library called "When the Kissing Had to Stop." You just know from the title this is not going anywhere, but it's in the family of a more famous thing called Cold Comfort Farm, and a bunch of funny little romances of, I don't know, the 40s and 50s.
Yeah. And the title would grab me. There's a local writer who just wrote it's like a crime novel set in Prohibition called "He's Either Dead or in St. Paul," and the title, I thought, okay, he's got the book may or may not be any good, but the title gets you. Yeah. So you got to pick it up, and so you're right. There are odd little corners, backwaters, whatever, of literature and of nonfiction as well, or almost specialty books. I like some writer like Michael Pollan. He writes essays on in defense of food. There's another one about building a or a house to write in his backyard, and the whole process on that. Wonderful writer. So I don't think it matters what his topic is, but he's going to write well about it and make it interesting to you. On a more popular level, Bill Bryson can do the same thing. He could write about all sorts of things and make it interesting. Or John McPhee.
Yeah.
Yeah, all those guys can, or what's her name, Sarah Vowell, can write about so many different topics, and it doesn't matter because they're going to make you want to finish the book. They're going to make you keep reading. And I love to introduce writers like that, because if you can distinguish between that and Stephen King, whose popularity continues to amaze me because he's not a good writer. I mean, just in terms of his sentences and his paragraphs, he's just not a good writer. Compared to these others who really can write, it's amazing. It's kind of a shame, but I want to introduce people to the ones to be able to say, it's hard to explain the difference to you, but read this and you'll see what I mean. You know?
Yeah. It's and to find something that you know isn't particularly good, but is just perfect for the little corner of experience or interest that you happen to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the Bobbsey twins.
Yeah.
Freddie the Pig.
I like Freddie the Pig. Well, just the irony of Freddie the Pig plays football. I mean, you know, which is available in my store. Anyway, yeah, I do, and I remember that one from when I was a kid. I don't know that I read Bobbsey Twins or Hardy Boys, but Tom Swift and the Walton Boys and stuff like that I read as a kid. And yeah, they're not that good, but they're fun.
Yeah, and they do a particular job
Mhm.
that hardly anything else.
Yeah.
Hardly anything else does. I'm impressed by your affection for children's literature and for the. You've
Yeah.
managed to hold on to that from when you were a kid, or.
Yeah, and some of them I've rediscovered, others I just, yeah, I don't think I've ever lost it, but I've gone back and read some of them. There's these books I read probably 4th or 5th grade by a sports writer named John R. Tunis, and he wrote other things too. But I went back and reread a couple of his recently and realized how advanced they were in terms of a couple of things. One is there's parts that are all dialogue and no description, and so for a kid to follow it isn't that easy. And the other one is a book of his called World Series. It's got this, it's your standard kids book plot, kids sports books, and the hero is the young center fielder, and his team makes it to the World Series, and you know he's going to save the day. They're down by 1 run in the 9th, 2 outs, runner on first base. The kid comes up, and he walks. He's not the hero. The guy behind him hits the home run. Go, what kind of ending is that? You know, that's realistic. That's not, you know, every other book, you know, the hero's gonna save the day, but here he's just part of the team. And it was just such a rereading it. I go, well, no wonder I liked this as a kid. It was different. It wasn't the same plot that you see every other time. The other one I went back and read lately, a woman named Carol Kendall wrote 2 books as far as I know, in the 50s, one called The Gamage Cup and the other is The Whisper of Block. And Gamage Cup won like the Newbery or something like that. It was well known at the time. Nobody's heard of them in English since then. They totally disappeared.
And they're wonderful little fantasies about this little valley that's shut off from the world, and the people there have developed their own. There's like a dozen towns in the valley, and the Gamage Cup, they're going to award the cup to the best village in the valley. And this one little village is decided that their only chance to win is by kicking out some of the people in the village because they're too weird. And so they send them off to live in the hills when the judges are going to come. And, you know, what a great plot piece. And of course, while they're up in the hills, an invasion of weird creatures from the other side of the mountain shows up. And the four of them save the village. And in fact, save the whole valley. And because of them, their village wins the cup. But that whole relationship of it, they didn't even kick out all four of them. Two of them they kicked out, another one kind of went on her own, and the fourth one was so irritated by the way they were being treated that he joined. You know, that's nice. That's a great kid's book plot. And the books disappear. You know, and it's you can sometimes find it on the internet. I don't think any library carries it anymore. I don't have it in my store because the only copy I have is at home. You know, and I talked to one of my sisters about it, and she remembered it vividly. Loved the book. I would love if I find another copy, it's hers. So. Yeah, in answer to the question, I love kids' books. Obviously I love all kinds of books, but I remember them, not just remember them fondly, but go back and read them again too.
Yeah. Well, there was a kind of interesting perspective put on the whole used book craft recently, and some of the things that Oliver Sacks said that, you know, or that were quoted. He was great one for saying, you know, it's not like we've superseded 19th century accounts of neurological conditions, you know. It's just they went at it differently. You know, he made his career on reading some of that old stuff in a different way.
Yeah.
And I mean, that possibility of reading old stuff in a different way. And, you know, there are things that are just superseded. There aren't very many.
Computer technology, maybe. Yeah. But you could go back and read some of the other, I'm trying to remember the ones I've seen, but it's like the case of Rudolph K. or something like this, and it would be a psychological study of somebody. And I know Sachs read stuff, goes back and read slow, he just died, but read stuff like that. And is this what you mean, where he goes back and says, oh, well, they were looking at it this way, and maybe there's another way to look at it now, because we've got maybe new ways of thinking about these facts. Is that kind of what
that kind of thing, and just, you know, in the absence of a lot of theory, just a lot of description of what was happening with people.
Yeah.
So it's a line I want to kind of trace out someday.
Because there are books out there that are really case studies of the boy who was raised by wolves or whatever. Yeah, that kind of thing.
I have, despite my thought it's just a small bookstore, I have visited your bookstore a couple of times. I've even bought a couple of books, although so far I've been, I think, restricting myself to the sale cart.
Okay.
It's a little different ethic for the sale cart.
Yeah.
But
we try not to put trash out there.
No.
There's at least that'll at least be interesting.
A bookstore is noted by the quality of its sale cart. Because you sort of figure if they're putting Madame Bovary out on the sale cart and it doesn't smell moldy,
Yeah.
They must have something pretty
Good stuff
interesting
inside.
inside.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're thinking too. It won't be our best copy of Moby Dick, but it'll still be readable.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the bookstore, we've been trying to have events, and some of them work and some of them don't. And author events, sometimes musical events, just whatever we think of. Well, of course, obviously, we're trying to bring people into the bookstore, but on a bigger scale, we're trying to get people exposed to all sorts of different kinds of art, and to get them to have fun. Now we've had semi-famous authors, at least locally, come in and draw a crowd or draw one or two people. We've had unknown authors come in and draw a crowd, but it's all family. The best events we've had have been poetry readings. They always seem to draw a good crowd, and music. We had one event, at least, that was a combination of music and books, which worked really well. One guy wrote 3 songs based on Steinbeck's Tortilla Flat, just for that. He's a book he was into, and they came off really well, and that was a really nice event and well attended. The other events we've had that I think are the most successful, one, there's a local Arab American literary magazine called Minerva, and they hosted an event and put it together. It was in commemoration, it was the anniversary of a car bombing in Baghdad where somebody had tried to blow up the Bookseller Street, like El Watanabe, or I've forgotten the name. But somebody tried to blow up the street, and then somebody in San Francisco had put together a book of poetry from poets all over the world who had written poems on that, basically, based somewhat on that occasion, and the silencing of literature. And so we had an event where Misner brought in 5 readers, plus somebody who read from the introduction to the book, and at the last minute recruited my son and I to also read. And it drew a good crowd, and it was such a lovely evening in terms of the theme and just the ideas behind it, and some really good poetry. The other, I think, best poetry event that we've had, the store's first anniversary, I contacted a dozen different poets, many of whom had read in the store before. A couple of them hadn't, but I knew them from someplace. And they all came in, and we read six of them read, and then we had a jug band play just to relieve the air a little bit, and then the other 6 read. And besides exposing people, and there were a lot of people there, and a lot of people came to hear one particular poet and then heard a bunch of others too, and it gave you an absolutely vast array of kinds of poetry. Oh, this is poetry, and so is this, and so is this, and some were funny, some were dead serious. A couple of them were more like spoken word, slam poetry type readers, and one had props, and a couple of them were quiet, very quiet poets. A couple of them were more the kind of poem that should be read out of a book quietly to yourself than to somebody else. And I got lucky in arranging them. I wasn't sure how everybody would come off, but it was like almost alternating styles throughout the evening. It was just a lot of fun. And just a great display of nobody knows really what poetry is, which is a great learning experience for the people who sat through enough of it to go, oh, okay, this works too. We have one event coming up. It'll probably be before this ever gets aired, but another local literary magazine, Whistling Shade, is having an event. Right now it's a week before Halloween, and they're doing a release next week of a basically thriller, ghost story type edition, and they're going to have a reading, and it's going to be down in our basement, which is a spooky place, and it'll be a lot of fun just to have that down there to lead people down by candlelight, and I'm looking forward to that one. That's a kind of creative event that you don't always get, and lots of times it's just the writers sitting around talking and reading a couple of sections from the book and talking about their next book, and the standard stuff, but this one's going to be different just because of the occasion.
So, what are you trying to do with the readings? I mean, I'm guessing that it's pretty hard to put a number on what it's done for you economically.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's your main point anyhow. You say a little bit more about why you do these things.
Oh. I'm going to say something. It'll probably sound pretentious, but that's okay. But I want more public art. I want performances that people can see. I want literature to be out there for all sorts of people, and because literature isn't just on the page, but also spoken word now means something else, but performances are important too. You look at the history of literature, you look at Homer, which didn't write it down, he just recited it, whatever. That's the way things got passed along for years, that this kind of theater or art or discussions of art is important, and it keeps the arts community going. There's so many different possibilities to learn about new writers, new forms of art, things like that, through having something in public, and inviting anybody who wants to come and take a look at it. And if they don't like it, they can always walk out. So we haven't gotten too creative yet, but I have some more ideas, and we just need to find somebody to participate in. So yeah, so it isn't just sure. Of course, I want people to know how to read to come into the store. There's always that behind it too, but beyond that, there's a desire to move things along in terms of getting literature out there for people and getting other arts out there for people.
The other night I was reading around in a history of Impressionism I bought at a yard sale, thinking it would be an introduction. Well, it's very much better than an introduction. I mean, it's splendid in almost every respect except it's miserably bound. But it starts out by talking about how the first show was in some photographer's studio, the thing that started it all.
Yeah, because where else can you start? Yeah.
And so you seem to aspire in a little way to be that kind of cultural first step for some things that might have a second step.
Yeah, and maybe it won't, maybe it'll flop, that. But also for writers we get a lot of writers who it's their first book or their first public reading. It was a lot of fun. A few weeks ago we had an event Friday night with writer making her first appearance, and then one Saturday was also with a writer making her first public appearance. And the second night writer came to the first one because she'd never been to one before. She had no idea how she was expected to behave. So she thought she'd come to the first one and check it out and see if she could learn anything from that. So, yeah, it's first time authors. They aren't going to get into Barnes and Noble. They aren't, maybe not even to Majors and Quinn or Common Good Books, because they want more established authors. They're more to sell books than to have events. And that would be lovely, and I'd sell some books this way, but that's entirely what it's there for.
Well, there was a time, and I know this from having run the newsletter that documented it, or helped run it, that there were so many venues for readings. Mm-hmm. You could go to something virtually every night, and they were at such different levels that kind of anybody could find one. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's happened to that sense of literary culture in the Twin Cities.
It's still pretty good. There's still, the major bookstores plus the Loft and a few other smaller independent bookstores like mine have events regularly. But there's also stuff at like Patrick's Cabaret and at coffee shops and at the Black Forest Restaurant and things like this will have regular events too. And you occasionally see something totally off the wall. Local poet I know was doing some reading in a park. I don't remember where it was, about a month ago, but where he would even have they were doing some sort of installation of a tape of him reading, and not just him, but there were others too, but a little more creative on that.
That's great. Now, how do you segue from this is an African American author talking about his experience coming to Minnesota, and we've got some books about that.
Oh, I don't.
You don't?
Yeah, I don't get out there in a flog much. I mean, other than the author's book, I won't say, oh, we've got similar books that are just as good as his. No, I'm not going to do
I
that.
see.
Yeah, I don't. The audience is there and may ask to see other things, and they may not, and that's okay. Yeah, again, it's the, I'm not going to cut into the author's time. And I'm not that comfortable getting up there and selling. I wouldn't do that.
So, from our last interview, I know you went through a kind of larval stage as a corporate attorney and such like.
And now I'm a butterfly. Yeah.
Well, I don't know, larvae for all sort of animals.
Large moth.
But I'm curious, or maybe you think of it as a hibernation. But when you were in that corporate attorney mode, did you go to things like the things you're sponsoring, or
some? Well, I still work 20 hours a week.
I see.
But I went to some things, like more music events than anything else. And then for a while there, I was raising kids and didn't have time to. The only cultural events I went to were at kids' bookstores and kids' bands and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I'd done that before. And had always enjoyed them. Well, some were boring, but enjoyed most of them.
Yeah. Do you have a sense now of who your kind of imagined audience member is? Is it somebody retired who has who now is kind of looking around for things to do, or how do you think about your audience there?
I haven't gotten a handle on it. I think maybe if I did, I would be more successful. But there are those, as you said, there's
Catholic retirement home a couple blocks down, where people come from that occasionally. But we also just as often get somebody who's interested in the topic. You know, we send out newsletters, we post flyers and stuff like that. We get somebody who's interested in the topic, or had read something previously by that writer, or something like that. And we get people who've never been to the bookstore before, and that's really nice, because that's part of the point. But yeah, I don't have a good handle on who the audience could be.
Yeah. I don't either on mine. I think I'd be scared if I knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But people do watch it, watch your shows. A lady called me this week. She'd seen the show, and she has a book she wants to publish, and she's going to send me a copy to see what I think. So somebody did watch.
I'm pleased. I'm pleased. This
Yeah.
is the first notice I've had in 5 years,
Yeah.
but it's the right sort of thing to have happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, do you have a prayer of getting on any of the national book tour circuits? Will Liz Gilbert ever read and eat my words?
Not if I have anything to say about it.
You just made a lot of enemies, you realize that.
You know, we had a number of events with last spring. What was I'm trying to remember the name of the group, but a big publishing and education group, AWP, Artists and Writers, something like that, Association of Writers. Anyway, can't remember the name, but it was in Minneapolis. We had an event every night during that. But no, I don't. First off, I run a used bookstore. The national tours with the national writers aren't going to go to a used bookstore. They're going to go to Barnes and Noble, probably over to Common Good Books, people who sell new books, and are better known. I mean, we get occasional emails or calls from somebody who's on tour and is coming through, but it's usually a very small writer or small publishing house, and they're just looking for somebody in town and see my name, you know, when they Google bookstores in Minneapolis or something. And we've booked a couple of them, but then a couple of them were good. But it's still we shouldn't be their first choice. So Elizabeth Gilbert, Dan Brown isn't coming.
I think a double header would be nice
Yeah.
there. Elizabeth Gilbert and Dan Brown.
Yeah.
I'd almost finance that just
Yeah,
to see
just
it's
to
like
see it happen.
and then
Yeah.
mud wrestling.
No, I think we were talking when we talked before that the bookstore stocks a lot of unusual and obscure books and things like that, things that people haven't found elsewhere. And I think a lot of our events are the same thing. Is that, you know, this is something unusual. That's what we're going for. We do get some local writers, local press, and we wanted to get some more of that.
Right. Well, I think about, I mean, it's sort of like that. The initial reason they don't come makes perfect sense, but not too deep.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's say take a milkweed writer. I mean, two things you want to have happen at the reading. One is that the book sells,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and second, that people get interested in finding that author. You're not interested in selling anything else in the store,
Mm-hmm.
because you probably don't have that much else in the store.
they'd
So
be
isn't it like Barnes and Noble? If you're Doubleday or something, you've got half the shelves,
Yeah.
but you don't have that. So any place will put, that can pull an audience
Mm-hmm.
and put the person kind of on the map.
But if we're third or fourth choice, they're going to go to Barnes and Noble or Common Good Books or Subtext, Major and Quinn first.
And then they've already drawn their most loyal fans.
Ah.
And
Yeah.
so who's going to show up for the fourth event or the fifth one in the same town? You know,
Yeah.
so that's that, and we've run into that a lot.
Right.
They've already read, yeah, and most of all their friends have already shown up, and
Right.
their mother's already bought 2 books. And, you know, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I like being first. I like being the first reading for an author for that, or especially if it's their first book.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they don't know what they're supposed to do, and so then the opportunities are open for doing something different. If they don't have if there's no prescribed routine for it.
So what kinds of things have happened when somebody was open to doing something different that struck you?
You know, I think the best have been, again, the poets, where one has pulled somebody out of the audience who he knew was another poet to read his own stuff, and then another one pulled somebody out of the audience to read one of that poet's poems. He said, "Oh, here, come up and read this for me." Yeah, unrehearsed. She was a good reader, so it worked out. I think in terms of the other fiction, non-fiction, non-poetry, the best ones are just sitting around talking about, you get into talking about books. You know, it's not a structured conversation, it's a conversation we've had with a few different writers is, why are there so many mystery books written in Minnesota? Why are there so many people, so many local authors writing mystery books? What is it about the Minnesota psyche? What kind of passive-aggressive Minnesota nice is going on here? You know, and that's a fun topic. That's, you know, and people read those too. People read a lot of mysteries in Minnesota. I know they do nationally too, but yeah, is it everybody thinking, oh, they almost got away with it. Maybe I could improve on it. You know, doing away with the spouse, or doing away with the old lady you could inherit from, or something. There's something fascinating about it but particularly for Minnesotan writers. It's amazing how many mysteries come out. The Sisters in Crime is an enormous club, group, whatever they are, of writers who get together and help each other write mysteries. And they aren't all sisters either.
Yeah. No, I just run into that. I keep running into it. Groups that write together, or that form kind of writing and reading societies.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And sci-fi has had a center in around Dinkytown. Produced the Yavik series, which was common written stuff by people who then went off and did a bunch of their own stuff also. But there's a real clubbiness sometimes.
It's a support group like AA or something too, but you know, don't give up. You know, you can write, you can do this, and we all struggle sometimes kind of group. I was in one for a while too. It started with a class at the Loft, and then some of us decided to keep it going. And there's one interesting group. I know 4 or 5 people who are in it, and they all come to each other's readings, which is nice. But they write totally different kinds of things, which is particularly interesting. And it isn't like this is Citizen Crime, but there's a horror writer, there's a poet, there's a guy who writes nautical adventure stories. You know, at least one, probably 2 playwrights in it, and that's interesting to see. It's just the craft of writing, not a particular genre or anything like that. They're just there to support the act of writing. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So there are lots of roles you can take with regard to writers and readers and you know, public education. You mentioned you kind of had some ideas for next steps. Anything particular that seems to you intriguing?
I want to do more with mixing the arts, either music and books, or particularly drawing and books, visual arts, and these are ill-formed plans or half-formed plans. So I hesitate to say much about them because they're just kind of floating around out there. But to be able to combine things like that, and I'm sure you could even, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, could you do dance in books? Yeah, sure, of course you could. There's got to be a way.
I got the gal for you.
Yeah.
Do it in a heartbeat.
yeah. I'm sure there's people out there. We do have at least one music and books event coming up in the next month. So, and I'd like to try to find more of that. And it has to be people willing to do it. There's a local filmmaker who's a regular at the store. Could probably do something with him. Stuff like that. There's possibilities there. And I'd done years ago, just out of college, done poetry, music, and film together with two other guys. It could have been better, but the idea is still there to combine this stuff.
So how's your space for this? I mean, you know, for film, you'd have to have some way of screening, and you'd have to drop the lights a bit, and stuff like that. Have you got a space flexible enough to make it work?
Yeah, although dance might be hard. We have an open enough space, and we can move furniture. We've got a piano there. That we've moved it around from. We have 2 rooms. The store has 2 rooms. We moved the piano up front. We've even put it out in the street once, and that was fun. And so it's big enough we can hold an audience of probably 35 or 40, and then the performance space can change sizes, and the audience space can change too. But you can picture a bookstore. We've had people in the aisles kind of craning their necks around, which is no worse than being in a bar to hear a band. You can't see much anyway, except that people aren't talking over the performer. So yeah, we can do stuff there. And besides using the basement for a thriller night, there's room enough to do stuff. So anybody watching this, you're invited to call me. Get a plug in now. But yeah, we'd love to be able to do stuff. If somebody has ideas.
Yeah.
And there was a guy who wanted to do a sleepover. We couldn't figure out how it would work today. He wanted to do a sleepover where people would stay up all night and reading, and possibly it was going to be that every hour on the hour you stop reading, you tell what you've read to the other people, then you go back to reading for a while. What? We weren't quite sure we wanted to stay open all night, and be the house parent or whatever. You'd have to be there. But it was a creative idea. It's like, yeah, maybe there's some way we could make something like that work sometime, where the book report is an ongoing kind of thing. And you've probably seen the events where on Bloomsday, they read the entire James Joyce's Ulysses over the course of the day, or there's a few others that do that too, they just to get a bunch of people in to read. Well, that's been done, and it's kind of fun. But how about variations on that? You know, so there's possibilities out there that people haven't tried, or that I don't know that people have tried.
Just one last question. I ran into, early on in the history of the bat, I ran into a truly great reader. I mean, everybody regarded her as a great reader. She still is a great reader. And I used to just bring her on once a year to tell me what she'd been reading. And she had a huge pile of books, and she'd say snotty things about some things, and good things about others, and say, this is good, but it's not as good as this other one I read 20 years ago. And it was like infecting people, not with the bug of reading, because lots of people have that, but with the bug of wide reading, reading and having opinions, such like that.
Yeah.
So apart from yourself, I presume you're a pretty great reader, at least in the club. Do you get great readers coming through, or do you have any thoughts about how to make people, in some sense, not better readers, but greater readers?
You know, always be willing to try something new. That's my advice. And to listen to the advice of other people who like something. It may not be what you like, but give that a shot. I had a guy come in last week who was reading with a plan. He hadn't read any fiction for years, and so he decided to read fiction. He started with English literature, starting with the beginnings of the novels. So he's reading Fielding and Richardson and God, what's his name, Smollett and Sterne and people like that. And here it is October, and he was up to Dickens. He was reading voraciously. He's reading a lot of stuff, but he had a plan for how to do it. I couldn't do that. I bounce around. I'll read something serious, and then some sci-fi or mysteries, and then some, or I'll have a book of short stories going at the same time as a book of essays, something like that. But this guy was going at it in a dedicated, organized fashion that somebody else might want to try.
Yeah,
and I always have the stack of books. It's fairly short now. It's like maybe a dozen books on it. And that way, when I finish one, I have, okay, it's one of these 12 is going to be the next one. Something in the stack is going to be next. And so that's where I'm going to go with it. And right now I'm reading, so far it's been really good, but in 200 pages into a 500-page book called Telegraph Avenue, and I can't pronounce the author's name. I always say it's Michael Chabon, but it might be Chabon. I have no idea how to pronounce it. Guy who wrote Cavalier and Clay and some other really good ones. And when I finish that, I'll go to the stack, and it has over half of them are novels, but there's also a history of the violence in Guatemala, and there's a book on the importance of the dot in history, the period, that kind of dot. Yeah, it's called Dot, by the way. I have no idea if it's any good or not, and I certainly have no problem with giving up on a book. I'm getting 20 pages in, going, nah, not this one. This one isn't going to make it. So, yeah, I try to give them all a fair chance, but some of them just don't. So, yeah. So advice to people is just don't limit yourself. Don't say, well, I like to read mysteries, so that's all I'll read. You try all sorts of different things.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.